Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight is very special. It's our 100th episode, and wow, it's been quite a journey. Thank you so much for being here, for all the ups and downs and adventures all over the world, under the oceans, into the clouds, back through time, all the way to Mars and back, and experiencing all the amazing adventures in between. We've been to so many places together so far, and there's plenty more to explore. So please, by all means, sit back, relax, and continue to enjoy the ride. Now, as you remember, I was finishing up Professor P's second science challenge and had the Minion personal transport vehicle power problem solved using wireless power transfer. But things were getting a little more mysterious as I received a warning from my ally, Chef Chet, and it was a warning about generosity. And then there was also a warning about my submarine. Now, that concerned me, so I checked my submarine, the O2, and it seemed fine. But also, Professor P seemed to be away with my ex-wife, Julia, and I wondered where they could have gone while leaving me in the middle of an almost impossible science challenge. Plus, add in odd behavior from his minions while he was away, and it was a very murky situation, and one I understood I would need to navigate carefully. Now, to recap why I even came to this fake volcanic island lair. Professor P challenged me to 3 science challenges. If I completed all 3, he would tell me the whereabouts of my missing mentor, Professor Sampson, who went missing years ago. But there was much more to it than that, and more mysteries than I was anticipating. The first mystery being his new girlfriend, who happened to be my ex-wife, Julia. While Julia told me the story on how they met and fell for each other over a mutual love of neuromorphic engineering, I was sure there were some pieces missing from that story as well. And those pieces had not yet been uncovered, as I was too busy trying to complete these science challenges, which was, of course, first priority on the fake volcanic island lair. Because if I didn't complete those challenges, I would never find my missing mentor, so that was again first priority. But as I was saying, I was finishing up the second science challenge after Professor P had successfully baited me and appealed to my science ego. He gave me an extremely difficult challenge, even with the use of the Infinite Science Cabal's engineering lab. I had to design a personal transport device that was capable of hovering at least 10 feet off the ground and be safe for science villain minions. The issue was that in order to hover, I needed, hovercraft fans, which required a lot of power, and the batteries to power the fans would make them too heavy. In order to solve this problem, I installed a wireless power transfer system. But before I tell you about how I completed Science Challenge number 2 and the unexpected consequences of successfully completing it, I want to talk to you about a few things. We want to thank you again for all your support and for being here and listening to our stories. It's much appreciated, and we are also warmed by all the wonderful and supportive reviews you've been posting. Thank you again. Also, there are two types of shows in the podcast high-speed show feed. There are the regular episodes, such as what you're listening to right now, and Professor Atwood's Sleepscapes to give you more adventures per month. These sleepscapes are pulled directly from my adventures with all the music and sounds we collect on our journeys. We then remix and remaster them and make them longer so you can create your own adventure in your mind as you settle in and drift off to sleep. And as always, don't forget to rate and review the show and maybe post about the show because that's how other adventurers find us. And if you want more info, merchandise, and donation and ad-free Patreon subscription options, you can always go to whitecatentertainment.com. We'd love to have you. All right then, let's get back to the story. I was on my way back to the engineering lab to finish up the second science challenge. After another cryptic note from Chef Chet about being wary of generosity, there was a second, much less cryptic note about checking on my submarine, the O2. And like I said, I did, and it was still secure, but there were many attempts to access it, both before and after it was docked inside the volcano. So everything should still be secure, but I just didn't have time to open her up and do a full inspection. I had to complete the second science challenge, and time was growing short. Once back in the lab, I rolled up the sleeves on my lab coat and got to work. I had the microwave power transmitter working and the receiver installed and also working in the Minion personal transport vehicle. The hovercraft fans were a little loud, but nothing could be done about that. Well, at least not in the time I had left. Now, I would need a Minion to do some final tests, so I searched for one outside the engineering lab. And honestly, it was hard to find one. There weren't that many, and it turned out they were all in the Minion Lounge watching old 80s cartoons. I interrupted an episode of the Transformers, and they looked disappointed, since it was one of their favorites and featured the Dinobots. But one of the Minions reluctantly agreed to come with me to test the system. We returned to the engineering lab, and I asked him to climb up onto the Minion personal transport vehicle. He cautiously complied, as Minions don't often say no, as that's usually grounds for dismissal. I turned on the power transmitter, and he turned on the vehicle. I adjusted the power tracking and confirmed that it was in line and syncing with the vehicle, and it was, which was excellent. The Minion soon became more comfortable with the controls and was soon zipping around the engineering lab with ease. I told him to hit the elevation button. The Minion did so and began to climb a full 10 feet into the air with a smile on his face. The gyroscope kept him stable and level, and he was soon zipping around the engineering lab, wireless and with a stable power receiver. I told him to come back down, and he seemed a bit disappointed, so I let him stay up there for a few minutes longer, and after a couple more times zooming around the lab, he landed back down with a big smile on his face. But then, something interesting happened. He got off the vehicle, congratulated me on a job well done, and said it worked perfectly. But as he said it, his smile faded, and he looked disappointed. What an odd reaction. He then asked if he could go back to the Minion Lounge. I said of course. He went back slowly and a little disheartened. I had no idea why. But I knew I had just uncovered another piece of the puzzle. I just didn't know where it fit yet. I had succeeded in the science challenge and had about 45 minutes left on the clock. I was doing some last-minute tweaks and polishing when an announcement came over the loudspeaker. It said, "Attention Minions and Professor Atwood, Professor P has returned." I heard the Minions scrambling outside the lab, most likely in an attempt to look busy. I was putting the finishing touches on the Minion personal transport vehicle when Professor P and Julia walked in. Professor P asked if I had completed the second science challenge, and hid his surprise when I said yes. He asked for an immediate demonstration and called in the same Minion who had helped me test it earlier. But this time the Minion looked even more nervous. We demonstrated the device again, along with the wireless power transfer system. Professor P was impressed, but tried to hide it. Then he stopped trying to hide it and asked for a turn on the transport vehicle. He then zoomed around the lab and even let out a science villain giggle of joy, which was, well, off-putting. The minion quickly exited, and Professor P asked me if the power transmitter could power multiple vehicles and if it could be made mobile. I said of course, with some minor modifications. Professor P smiled a smile I didn't really like and offered me his congratulations on successfully completing the second science challenge. Julia said she was proud of me and that we would talk more tomorrow as they were tired from their trip. I asked where they had gone, and neither one of them answered me. But Professor P told me I had done such a good job on the second science challenge I had earned a day off. Tomorrow would be a free day for me to explore the island if I so chose. Professor P was being generous, which immediately put me on my guard, which was a good thing because it turned out to be not much like a day off at all. Naturally, I was suspicious, but I did not have enough information about my suspicions at that time to speculate about what Professor P was planning. But one thing I was sure of, that if he was giving me a day off, it was not out of the goodness of his heart. But it was late and I was tired and hungry as I had worked through dinner. Chet must have known this, as a minion appeared with some hot comfort food, a fresh wood-fired pizza that I could take back up to my room. Well, not the healthiest thing to eat late night, I know, but I appreciated the comfort food after a long day, and it's also not like I received a menu in the evil fake volcanic lair. Professor P told me he would let me get to it and said once again to enjoy my day off exploring the jungle tomorrow, and I didn't like the hidden smirk in his voice. But there was nothing to be done now except eat, shower, and sleep, and I was in need of all three. Julia smiled gently one last time at me and said she was proud of me and moved her hair back once more to reveal her face. It was a subtle gesture, but I was beginning to understand. Some pieces were starting to come together, but others still remained elusive. I tried one last attempt at finding out where they had been. I asked again, nonchalantly, where were you again? And Julie was about to answer when Professor P cut her off with a curt, "Good night, Professor." Well, it was late, and there wasn't anything more I could do or figure out for the time being. I went back to my room and enjoyed my pizza. It was still warm, and had pepperoni and sausage on one side and was plain on the other, as Chet wanted to at least give me some options. I had a slice of each and put the rest in my room's minibar fridge. I took a shower and then laid down into bed, but could not get to sleep right away. This was another odd wrinkle that I was not expecting. There was no reason at all for Professor P to give me the day off. Clearly he was up to something, but what? Chef Chet obviously knew something and had warned me about generosity in a note in my lunch. I looked out my window. The volcano lights were on, lighting up the jungle and the peaceful beach as the waves gently broke as they reached the shore. The monkeys were even all asleep by now, so while there was some jungle noise, I was high enough up in the volcano that I barely heard it. I thought about islands, and of course tropical islands, ones without a fake volcano. They are isolated treasures unto themselves. Now an island, or an isle, is a piece of land distinct from a continent completely surrounded by water. There are continental islands, which are formed by being split from a continent by plate tectonics, and oceanic islands, which have never been part of a continent. Oceanic islands can be formed from volcanic activity, grow into atolls from coral reefs, and form from sediment along shorelines, creating barrier islands. River islands can also form from sediment and debris in rivers. Islands are host to diverse plant and animal life. Oceanic islands have the sea as a natural barrier to the introduction of new species, causing the species that do reach the island to evolve in isolation. Continental islands share animal and plant life with the continent they split from. Now, depending on how long ago the continental island formed, the life on that island may have diverged greatly from the mainland due to natural selection. Now, humans have lived on and traveled between islands for thousands of years at a minimum. Some islands became host to humans due to a land bridge or a continental island splitting from the mainland. Today, up to 10% of the world's population lives on islands. Islands are popular targets for tourism due to their natural beauty, isolation, and unique cultures. Uncharted, secret, and hidden islands are no exception. They are often just as beautiful, just harder to find. Even Professor P's hidden fake volcanic island lair, and home of the Infinite Science Cabal, was quiet and beautiful, if you take away the fake volcano and, of course, Professor P and his minions. I thought more about islands as I drifted off into a sound, well-deserved sleep. When I awoke the next morning, the sun was shining brightly, and I remembered that, oddly, I had nothing to do today. Oh, how that would change, but more on that later. Anyway, I stretched, got dressed, and took a walk towards the cafeteria to grab breakfast. I was hoping Chef Chet was there to possibly give me a little more insight on the day off situation, but also because he made, amazing omelets as well. Well, this was the first time of the day my plans would be unexpectedly changed, and not for the better. Professor P and Julia intercepted me in the hall on the way to the Minion cafeteria, and Professor P, pretending to be generous, offered for us all to have breakfast in the executive cafeteria. It was clear it was not a request, and besides, it was the best way for me to get more information. Julia smiled at me and said Chet was an amazing chef, and he really went all out for the Infinite Science Cabal executives. I followed Professor P and Julia to the executive cafeteria. Now, of course, it was smaller than the Minion cafeteria because there were considerably less executives at the Infinite Science Cabal compared to Minions. But with the budget cuts, I'm sure there were less executives too. In fact, there were only two. One had a top hat and an ascot on who introduced himself as Dapper Science John, and a grittier-looking scientist with a dirty lab coat and an eye patch who called himself Dr. Roughhouse. They greeted me warmly, and I disliked both of them immediately. As we were seated at our table, I noticed there was no buffet, and Professor P commented that he didn't like them and preferred all the work to be done by minions. He thought getting up and getting his own food was ridiculous, and he seemed a little more animated about it than usual, so I wondered if there was some hidden history with Professor P and a confrontational breakfast buffet that he had yet to work through. Anyway, we sat down and a minion took our orders. I didn't see Chet, but I knew he was in the back cooking. With Professor P watching me this closely, there was no way he could send me another hidden note. I was on my own. I ordered a vegetable frittata with a side of chicken sausage, as I wanted to eat a little healthier this morning, as I honestly didn't know what the day would hold for me. Professor P and Julia each ordered the blueberry French toast, which looked delicious as well. I found it interesting that they ordered the exact same thing. Julia never did that in the entire time we were together. She always found it was important to have variety and to order something different than everyone else at the table. It was just her thing at restaurants. Professor P smiled and told me I was doing an amazing job with the science challenges, and he thought I deserved a day off. I should explore the island. He said they even had an ancient temple on the island. No, okay, obviously it wasn't a real ancient temple. I mean, just like the volcano, it was man-made just to create more Infinite Science Cabal evil island layer ambiance. A minion brought our platters, and we dug in. Honestly, Chef Chet's cooking was so good, I almost forgot for a moment I was probably in the middle of a conspiracy, along with possibly being in some danger. I took a look at Julia again, and she was enjoying her breakfast as well, but there were moments when it looked like she wasn't, and I knew it wasn't because of Chet's cooking. Professor P continued and said the third science challenge could wait and to just enjoy the island, explore, observe the monkeys, and hike up to the ancient temple. Of course, he added, I would need all of my exploring and hiking gear, right? It was on my submarine, correct? I said yes, it was, and that's when I knew. He wanted me to open up my submarine. But this was an obvious ploy. Professor P wasn't stupid. He knew I would see right through it. He laughed and added, oh, I can see you're suspicious. Not to worry, I assure you I will send my minions away and you can access your submarine unsupervised. It seemed once again I had no choice, but what if I did? What if I refused? I didn't have to explore the island. I mean, I kind of wanted to, but if he wanted me to, then I was of course suspicious. I said I would think about it. Professor P continued, I can see you are hesitant, so let me tell you where we went over the last 2 days as we enjoy our breakfast. Julie and I went to Niagara Falls. I looked over at Julie and she was smiling, but it seemed very forced. Not that she was forcing a smile, but that she was more forced into smiling. It's a subtle difference, but I caught it. Professor P started lecturing about Niagara Falls, and I politely listened, even though I wasn't really interested in his vacation. Now, the way he started lecturing about Niagara Falls, it was as if I had never heard of them, which was of course annoying, and I'm sure that was intentional. He explained that Niagara Falls is a group of 3 waterfalls at the southern end of Niagara Gorge, spanning the border between the province of Ontario in Canada and the state of New York in the United States. The largest of the 3 is Horseshoe Falls, which straddles the international border of the 2 countries. It is also known as the Canadian Falls, until perhaps the current president changes it. Anyway, the smaller American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls lie within the United States. Bridal Veil Falls is separated from Horseshoe Falls by Goat Island and from American Falls by Luna Island, with both islands situated in New York. Formed by the Niagara River, which drains Lake Erie into Lake Ontario before flowing out to the Atlantic Ocean through the St. Lawrence River, the combined falls have the highest flow rate of any waterfall in North America that has a vertical drop of more than 160 feet. During peak daytime tourist hours, more than 5.9 million cubic feet of water goes over the crest of the falls every minute. Horseshoe Falls is the most powerful waterfall in North America, as measured by flow rate, of course. Niagara Falls is famed for its beauty and is a valuable source of hydroelectric power. Balancing recreational, commercial, and industrial uses has been a challenge for the stewards of the falls since the 19th century. Now, Niagara Falls was formed when glaciers receded at the end of the Wisconsin glaciation, the last ice age, and water from the newly formed Great Lakes carved a path over and through the Niagara escarpment en route to the Atlantic Ocean. Now, when the ice melted, the upper Great Lakes emptied it to the Niagara River, which followed the rearranged topography across the Niagara escarpment. In time, the river cut a gorge through the north-facing cliff, or cuesta. Because of the interactions of 3 major rock formations, the rocky bed did not erode evenly. The Cap Rock Formation is composed of hard, erosion-resistant limestone and dolomite of the Lockport Formation. Now, that hard layer of stone eroded more slowly than the underlying materials. Immediately below the cap rock lies the weaker, softer, sloping Rochester Formation. This formation is composed mainly of shale, though it has some thin limestone layers. It also contains ancient fossils. In time, the river eroded the soft layer that supported the hard layers, undercutting the hard cap rock, which gave way in great chunks. This process repeated countless times, eventually carving out the falls. Submerged in the river in the lower valley, hidden from view, is the Queenston Formation, which is composed of shales and fine sandstones. All 3 formations were laid down in an ancient sea, their differences of character deriving from changing conditions within that sea. But the bottom line was that nature knew what she was doing. The average annual flow rate is 85,000 cubic feet per second. Since the flow is a direct function of the Lake Erie water elevation, it typically peaks in late spring or early summer. During the summer months, at least 99,000 cubic feet per second of water traverse the falls, some 90% of which go over Horseshoe Falls, while the balance is diverted to hydroelectric facilities and then on to American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls. This is accomplished by employing a weir, the International Control Dam, with movable gates upstream from Horseshoe Falls. The water flow is halved at night and during the low tourist season winter months and only attains a minimum flow of 49,000 cubic feet per second. Water diversion is regulated by the 1950 Niagara Treaty and is administered by the International Niagara Board of Control. The verdant green color of the water flowing over Niagara Falls is a byproduct of the estimated 60 tons per minute of dissolved salt and rock flour, which is very finely ground rock, generated by the erosive force of the Niagara River. Now, Professor P continued. He said about 10,900 years ago, the Niagara Falls were between present-day Queenston, Ontario, and Lewiston, New York, but erosion of the crest caused the falls to retreat approximately 6.8 miles southward. The shape of Horseshoe Falls has changed through the process of erosion, evolving from a small arch to a horseshoe bend to the present-day V shape. Just upstream from the fall's current location, Goat Island splits the course of the Niagara River, resulting in the separation of Horseshoe Falls to the west from the American and Bridal Veil Falls to the east. Engineering has thankfully slowed erosion and recession. Now, at that point, I just interrupted, saying it was fascinating and maybe I would take him up on his offer of exploring the island, as mainly I just wanted this unpleasant, not including the food, breakfast to just end. But I looked over at Julia and she began looking very uncomfortable, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. And that's when I put it all together. Why they really went to Niagara Falls. That's where Bradley and Dolores went for their vacation. Professor P smiled a very unfriendly smile and knew I had guessed correctly. He saw I had figured it out and just said, "They're in the ancient temple. Enjoy your day off." And then he got up and left, with Julia leaving with him, clearly conflicted. She didn't even smile at me on her way out. She also didn't say anything, and it looked like she was trying to. She adjusted her hair one more time, and I noticed. This time, I didn't compliment her. So my day off was now a rescue mission to recover my assistant Bradley and his girlfriend, mercenary and security officer Dolores. Now, I was curious to see how she had been captured, as she was the most capable security officer and mercenary I had ever met. But no one was perfect, of course. Well, at least I had a good and healthy breakfast. I sat there for a moment longer, collecting my thoughts, when another minion came in with a packed lunch. Chet knew. It was another grilled chicken sandwich, but this time more of a Santa Fe style. But as much as I appreciated the sandwich and the sides, all packed for a hike, I immediately looked for another note. There was one, but there was nothing cryptic about it. It just read, "Professor Atwood, go save your friends. I will take care of things here. And I will tell you all about my rescue mission next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. And something we don't talk about very often. Anger. We all experience it, and sometimes it can have a mind of its own. But nothing good ever comes from letting anger run things. Now, don't get me wrong, you should be angry about certain things like supervillains, Infinite Science Cabals, insurance companies, and influencers who make large sums of money for no apparent reason. But you can't let that anger rule you or define you. Use it positively. I mean, I was quite angry about these latest developments, and you may be able to hear it in my voice. But I would not let it control me, because I know that's what Professor P wanted. He had kidnapped my assistant and his girlfriend to put me off balance, to get me angry. This was to get me off my game so I would fail the third trial. This day off mixed with a kidnapping was engineered so I would get careless and make a mistake. It was so he could spring science challenge number 3 on me while I was angry and distracted. I wasn't going to let that happen. My first priority, of course, was the safety of Bradley and Dolores. After that, I would deal with Professor P and the third science challenge. So remember, despite your anger, keep your priorities straight and always do good and be good, whether you're dealing with a combative person or a difficult situation. Focus on the issue, work through to a solution, and remember to move forward calmly and rationally, whether you're dealing with an airline or rescuing your kidnapped assistant. Either way, feel your feelings, feel your anger, and don't be ashamed of how you feel. But it's important to let your anger be your guide and never your driver. You'll get there in the end. Godspeed and good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tanski at rontanskimusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.